Hi all, this is Dr. Kala S.J., an Associate Professor at the Research Center of English, Fatima College, Madurai. So, now we are going to deal with feminism with a small f. This is by a noted Nigerian novelist and writer Buchi Emecheta. It was delivered in the year 1988 and this has been compiled by Kirsten Holst Peterson in his book In Criticism and Ideology. This is a talk that Buchi Emecheta delivered during her second African Writers Conference. In this, she discusses her artistic concerns and feminist perspective. She throws light upon how African feminism differs significantly from Western feminism due to two main reasons. One is because of the distinct cultural values of these African women, and the next is because of their sexual identity. So, here she begins her essay. That's how I'm going to refer to it instead of calling it a talk. So here she begins saying that she's just an ordinary writer. She claims to be an ordinary writer, but we all know that she's not so. She's so modest and humble in stating herself or calling herself an ordinary writer. She says, I'm an ordinary writer, and like any other writer, I'm impelled to write, and I have to write. If I don't write, I would lose my sanity, and I'm sure to be put in an asylum. So she says, somehow I have to communicate. And like any other writers, I too happen to be one of them. And she says she tried working in a university, but then it didn't work out well. She couldn't continue there. She even tried being a critic, but she didn't take pleasure in criticizing others' work. She remembers how she felt when her husband burnt her first book for the first time. She says, I'm just reading it from the text. She says, if you can burn my book, you can just as well burn my child, because my books are like my children and cannot criticize my children. So she says, when she had her babies, she remembers that they were very, very ugly. They had ugly heads like their father, but their bodies were like hers, she says. Then looking at the babies who were in the pram, she always used to refer to them and say, what an ugly baby. And probably she compares the same with her work. So how would a mother feel when the baby is criticized to be ugly? When the same would be the feeling of a writer when his or her writing is criticized. So she says, even a critic asked her, how would you feel when somebody criticizes your work? She quotes, you have so much anger in you. How can you bear it? Well, I said, I can't bear it, so I have to let it out on paper. Probably this is one of the reasons that she identifies to have been the sole reason behind taking up writing as a career. So she says that she started writing in 1972, and in a few weeks ago, that is to say by 1988, she had hands full of work in her, to her credit. She says she had 16 novels to her credit. And she says, to make you understand how I write, let me tell the background. And she goes on to narrate it. She says that she was born in Lagos, a part in Nigeria. She was raised partly in Lagos and partly in her village, Ibuza. And she explains her wish to tell. She says, there's something within me that makes me narrate stories. There's something within me that makes me a storyteller. So probably this particular skill of narrating a story or telling a story must have been acquired by me even as a child. So she goes back to her roots and she makes us understand how this thing really worked out for her, how writing came up as a career for her. So she says her parents, they basically came from Ibuza to the city Lagos in search of work, and so there they were being partly educated, they embraced CMS. What's CMS? It's a Church Missionary Society. So she says, hailing from the Igbo kingdom, the old Igbo kingdom, her parents always ensured that she and her brother were very much acquainted with the life of Ibuza. So what would they do? They worked at home, so they saw to it that they inculcated or internalized the culture, their own culture, their native culture. So they sent their children to their own parents or to for rearing up. And she just recollects how they used to be working at home during the rains, and when it was sunny, they used to be working on the farm. So the parents felt if they were in Lagos, they might lose their morals, and so and that they would tend to speak Yoruba, which is not their language, all the time, and therefore they wanted their children to learn the vigorous Igbo life. And she also makes us understand that even in Nigeria they had a kind of a discrimination between what languages they spoke. So they themselves were not comfortable. One clan was not comfortable in speaking the other clan's language. So here she says at home when they were sent to Ibo, she came across real storytellers. Yoruba tell their stories beating their drums. So she tries to distinguish between their tradition and the Yoruba tradition, Igbo tradition, the Yoruba tradition. So she says, in the Yoruba tradition, they told stories beating their drums, and the children would follow the storyteller from one street to another, reminding them of the Pied Piper of Hamelin, who was summoned by the people to chase away the rodents because of the menace was too much for the city to bear. You know that story. So now she draws a kind of distinction between the Yoruba storytellers and the Igbo storytellers. So on the contrast, Yoruba storytellers had one's own mother as their storyteller. So here she says, she very fondly recollects her big mother. Who is her big mother? None other than her aunt. And then she goes on to explain to us, had she not told, we wouldn't have understood. She goes on to explain to us that a child might belong to many mothers, not just a biological one, in fact to many mothers. So here she had her big mother, her aunt as her big mother. So they would sit around her at her feet for hours together, mesmerized, listening to her story, because her voice had a trance-like effect, and through her stories, she would narrate about the heroic deeds. I'm sorry about that spelling mistake there. The heroic deeds, her ancestors, their norms, their mores, social mores and customs. And then she also tells the way in which these stories were narrated. The stories were narrated in a sing-song way. So she says that till the age of 14, she was listening to all these things, and she thought that when they sang all these stories, she thought that they were inspired by some spirits. So till the age of 14, she had that thought. She had that mistaken notion. And then her visits to Ibuza were filled with enjoyment and information, particularly through the stories. And so she was very much inspired by her big mother. So since then she decided to be a storyteller like her big mother when she grew older. So now she comes on to the task of storytelling, or how she desired to be a writer, what made her write. So she says she decides to tell stories like her big mother. Okay, so now she realizes that to tell stories to different people from different places, she has to use a language that was not just her first language, that was not just her second language, not a third language, but rather her fourth language. That's surprising. Okay, so her stories, therefore, whenever she had to say that story in the fourth language, so that she had a wider reach, a greater audience, she felt that the flavor of it was lost, the color of it was lost. And in fact, even at school, her English teacher, when she approached her with the desire of writing the story, she tells us about her English teacher, who she claims to have come from the Lake District. Okay, so this English teacher was a very great fan of William Wordsworth, And so, when she used to be passionately talking about the poet whom she really admired, our little Emecheta at the school level would tell the teacher that she's also going to write like Wordsworth. Immediately, the English teacher, instead of motivating her, she says that she had been too egoistic and that she has to go to the chapel. Why? To pray for forgiveness, because she also states that, please understand, pride always goes before a fall. You've been too proud about your own writings, so you have to go and ask for forgiveness before the Lord at the chapel. But Emecheta doesn't go to the chapel, and because she believes that God has other important things to do than to listen to her own dreams. Okay, so what does she dream? She dreams about, her dreams are from Igbo bush culture and historic Yoruba. So she has two cultures blended, and she feels that her dreams were attainable, unlike the English teacher who had dissuaded her from doing so. So she recollects how the art of communication really evolved or was honed in her. So she pretty well understands that English came into their life only through the early missionaries. But the early missionaries were good enough to give the language, but they were not good enough to penetrate into the African minds. So the art of communication, she feels, she generalizes, anybody could communicate well through pictures, music, writing, oral folklore, and these are very vital to the human beings, she says. So she says her first attempt at writing a book was her first novel, The Bride Price, which was resented by her husband. And she compares her husband with her English teacher, who also was not happy with her desire to write. So he also sort of expresses the same idea that pride goes before a fall. At 22, she understood that she cannot manage with a husband who is totally in disagreement with her dreams, who is totally in contrast with her dreams. So she gets separated from him. At the age of 22, she is husbandless and she's got 5 young children by them. Now she also thinks that she needs to be skilled like her big mother, and therefore she decides to acquire a string of degrees before writing, so that she can make writing as her means of livelihood. Now she also notices that her family is fast growing, and so she decides to pursue a degree that would help her master the English language as well as understand the society in which she lives. And therefore she chooses to learn sociology and then simultaneously continues with her writing. Initially she had enough rejections, like her English teacher, husband, and all that. In 1972, in the New Statesman, her work was serialized and it later on appeared as her first book. So, where did she really get the storytelling art, or how did she really hone it? We get to know about her initial writings. So, writing, for a long time, she felt that it was living entirely on her writing. So, she had to depend solely on her writing. And gradually she found that her babies were all grown up, they were leaving home, and so she started to focus more on writing. And she also felt that writing was there in the family, and she also at sometimes had a feeling that she was not doing anything clever as her big mother was doing free about 32 years ago, even without a degree or any professionalism. So she observes, how is it that her storytelling is different from her big mother's storytelling? And she notices that the difference was her big mother always narrated the story in the moonlight, whereas Emecheta had to type it out. So it was not oral, it was written. So that's the mode of communication that she's highlighting upon. And she also tells us where she picked up this typewriter from. She says she picked it up from Woolworths in London. And then she says that she feels that she was not good in reading then. and to the extent that she couldn't even read what she had written. But then at one point of time she realizes this, that writing is a very very lonely profession that does not involve other people. So she had to spend most of her time at her own desk doing what? Thinking of ideas, reasoning them out, putting them into fiction or stories. Then sometimes some might even start living the life. Sometimes she feels that as a writer she might also try to imitate her own characters. Then she says she just applauds the conference organizers, and she says the conference of such types, that is to say the second African Writers Conference, had been a great turning point because it has saved her from becoming a strange person. And then she says, she asked a question, an oft asked question: who are you writing for? People normally ask her. So she says, I do not know who will pick up my book and read. So how do I know whom I'm writing for? She says she wonders if the same question is posed to the painters or to a sculptor that I'm adding up. Okay? And she says they can control their painting when they're still painting. But then, can the painters ever tell who would love their painting? They cannot. And similarly, the book is similar to a child on a mother's back. The child is free to move its hands and lift anything without the notice of the mother's knowledge. Okay? But then the mother is not capable of doing that. So she says, the first question, who are you writing for, seems to be quite patronizing. So she thinks that it is healthier not to think of the readers. Let me write whatever I want to rather than think of who my readers are. Then she says, how does she go about? She goes about chronicling everyday events and then weaving them into a piece of literary work. And she also analyzes and realizes that writers have the freedom to control, imagine and chronicle, and that writers do not write for a particular group of people, rather they write for everybody. So with this, she goes on to focus on the content of her books, and she says writer has a crucial control over the subject because it doesn't deal with great ideological issues. Rather, they write about the little happenings of everyday life. Being a woman, an African-born woman, she sees everything through an African woman's eyes. She chronicles the little happenings in the lives of the African woman, for which and for that she is called, or she is identified as a feminist. And she says, yes, I'm an African feminist. What sort of feminist? I'm an African feminist with a small f, she says. So she says, I write about families, and because she still believes that families are a great matter of support and the pillars of any writers. So she says that she writes about women who try very hard to hold their family together. What more? She says until it becomes absolutely impossible, she has no sympathy for a woman. So she says, she has nothing to do with any woman who is separated from her children. She says you cannot choose a career away from a family. Family and a woman's career are intertwined, she says. Therefore, she says that she has no sympathy for a woman who has deserted her children just because she has to take up a career. She says, nor does she have any woman. So that doesn't mean that she says, or she emphasizes on the fact that any woman should be a kind of subordinate to her husband. So she says she doesn't have any respect for a woman who is staying in a marriage with a brood of a man and who is not respectable enough. Okay? And what does she want? She wants that all African women be educated, because she feels that it is only education that can redeem women. It can help them read and it can help them rear a generation. And she also goes to the extent of saying one who educates a woman educates a community, but one who educates a man, or when a man is educated, only a man is formed, or he becomes transformed. So she says, being an African woman, she can write about wars, about nuclear holocaust and everything, and at the same time she can also write about the life and experiences of women under such conditions. Okay, So now she says she's going to read about two pieces from her own observations or some from her own and give her own observations on that. She, as usual, is very modest and simple about it, and she says that her style is simple, but that's her way of writing. As a person herself, she herself states that she's very simple and unsophisticated, and I agree 200 percentage. And she says that where cultural people, when people come to her in the name of culture and all that, it makes her very nervous. So she decides to read a piece on polygamy. She goes on to the extent of saying that polygamy, some consider it to be an oppression, but in certain cases it is not, and it is really amazing to read what she has written. She says that she has visited Nigeria often, and then some women really appreciate and promote polygamy because it's in favor of them. And so she wants to narrate what happened a few weeks ago. When she was in her bedroom in Ibuza, she was listening to a conversation between her husband and his senior wife. Okay, so it was a cool and damp day, and there were debates going on in their bed about 6 in the morning. So she says, I did not have to look at the clock because from the very fact that there were songs of the morning and then the children were going out to fetch water, cocks were crowing, I knew that it was 6 in the morning. So she says, Awango and his senior wife Obike, Obike's senior wife Awango, they came into my thoughts. Then what was happening? Obike and his senior wife were in bed, and Obike did not allow wanted to have sex early in the morning with his senior wife, but then she was not happy about it. She rejects it, giving it an excuse, saying that she has a full and hectic day ahead of her, and she condemns him for harassing her. She also goes to the extent of reminding him that the children are sleeping next door, and she calls him a beast, and she says, why don't you go to your new wife? And then he, instead of understanding her, he just complains her about her loud mouth, and he lists out certain grievances, saying that she doesn't cook for him properly, that she doesn't come to his bed whenever he calls him. And then he asked, did I pay the bride price to you for this reason? Then the voice of Obiko was low, and it was a kind of a righteous anger was there. At that time, Wango says, why don't you go to your new wife? For which he says, how can I? She's pregnant. Then Wanga insists she needs energy for the farm and trading, as it's the market day. Okay, you'll get to know about the market day a little later. And so if she's pregnant, she says, you go get another wife. So see, girls or boys or whoever is listening to this, see, it's quite amazing that the first wife itself promotes that, and you will see the reason for it. And Emecheta at one point says, no, I couldn't listen to them completely because I had to miss the quarrel. My mother-in-law just chipped in, and she said, do not bother about these guys, they're always like that. And she even goes to the extent of complaining about her own son, and she labels him, her mother-in-law labels her own son, that's Emecheta's husband, as shameless. And she seems to be giving a statement about how men always look at their partners as sexual partners and nothing else. So she says, yeah, he can go and marry another girl, but which girl will really take him, because he's too lazy and he doesn't even go to the farm at all. And then Emecheta says, my mother-in-law should know better. She had 13 children, so she will know. Actually, they had been living in Lagos. It was a city. And she says, being in Lagos, they didn't have enough room for her husband to bring another wife. They had just enough room for themselves. And that was one reason that he couldn't bring another wife. So Emecheta says, if her father-in-law had been living in the village, probably the scenario would have been different, and he would have brought another wife for himself. Now, saying this, she comes on to her own Western sister. She says, when I talk about polygamy, I know my Western sisters will find it difficult to understand. She says, yes, sex is important to us, but that's not the central or the core of our lives. She says most Nigerian women are promiscuous, rather sexually oriented. Why are they so? They might be doing some other flesh trade, but why do they do so? Okay, so they might be sexual workers. She says all for economic reasons. So as I told you earlier, Emecheta has a beautiful blend of the Yoruba and the Igbo culture, and so she recollects from the Yoruba culture saying that Yorubans always say that if a woman has sex with a man, it should be she should ensure that she is not into debt. Okay, then she agrees. Yes, few of our Nigerian women or African women, they they turn out to be sexual workers, commercial sexual workers, but then when they are with their husband, it's totally different. Their attitude is different, their emotions are different. They feel that when they are with their husband, they are performing their duty, they are in love with him, and that they are doing it in order or for the welfare of their children. So she contrasts that with a young woman's approach. She says probably a young woman might dream of romantic love, but then as soon as she starts having children, her loyalty is shifted, and most of the time she feels that if she does everything for the sake of her children. Now, she goes on to the extent of saying that in the villages, women are not isolated. They are not in isolation either. Rather, they go seek the company of her age mates, their friends. So they have good friends. They have women in the market. Now, so they have a very good company, they have a very strong support, a very good network of women of their age group. And she says, Emecheta says, if at all they need advice, they go to elder women like their mother, or as I told you, they have too many mothers. So they one of their mothers or their mother-in-law. So how do they look at polygamy? If there is another woman in the family, they look at her as a person who would share their work. She will help share the housework, they say. And she says, like Mwango, who cited, whose conversation with the husband she cited earlier. So she says, the day her husband wanted her, so the day her husband wanted her to be with him as a sexual partner was on the Eke day. Eke day is a big market day, we'll get to know about it. So on an Eke day, what's her routine? She had to be up early in the morning so that she can be in the market. So not just that, she had to contribute her 20 naira. Naira is their currency, which is almost 10 pounds, and this is a saving fund of the market women. So all these market women, they come and save together, like our small saving schemes in India that we have. Okay, so this is the way they raise the capital for their business, so that they don't have to go to the banks. And this is worse to note that most of the banks will not allow women to borrow money. They will not lend money to women. Okay, so she says that she would contribute her 20 naira, and later in the evening they had to put Otugo, and she had to be at the Akbalani group, and they had to get in a dance. So they have one after the other a tight schedule on the Eke day or the market day. On that day, despite knowing his own wife's schedule and his own wife's commitment, Obike requests or Obike wants her or tortures her to have sex with him. So she says that they go, she puts on, that's kind of a costume, that's what I understand, and they go and dance a freestyle dance. And she says they dance at the second burial of the grandmother. So see, girls, we understand that there's a kind of a ritual that they have for themselves, so that they can be together as women, they can enjoy their life as women. And then she says this dress, if she has to stitch up, she had to spend all the amount that she had saved up for almost 3 years. Then she goes on to describe how she would carry a navy blue head tie, carry a navy blue Japanese fan, and wear black flat shoes or slippers. And then she reiterates the fact, or emphasizes the fact, that none of them have been bought by their husbands. and Wango worked on her cassava farm 4 days of the week. Okay, cassava, it's a kind of an underground underground tuber. Okay, so now she works on it she works on that cassava farm for 4 days of the week, and there she sold the gari. Gari is the starch made out of the cassava. Okay, on the fifth day, so 4 days she had to work in the farm. On the fifth day they would have the eke, or the market day. It's more or less like a shandies. Okay, and every time she had to take that 20 naira, which is the esusu. Esusu is the small saving scheme that these women, the trading women, had made among them. Okay, so she took all of that, and this esu forced saving helped her. Sometimes that saving was used to send her sons to college, children to college, or the remaining, other than what she spent upon her family, she would spend the rest exactly the way she liked it. And then at the funeral dance also, the group will give. See, not just that, they always supported their groups, the women folk. At the funeral dance, they would ensure that 1,000 naira was raised from their fund to help out the bereaving person, the bereaved lady. And you see, they would enjoy, dance till late very night, almost like men partying in the bars or pubs. And at about 8 p.m., that's their late time. Okay, they would one of these women would hear going home. So even when they're going home, they would be singing, and the song would be there in their heads. They would be fully drunk, whiskey, beer, gin, brandy, anything that they want to, they would drink. And on that particular day, no man will ever dare to even talk to them. And then if somebody asks for cooking, what will you do for your husband? They say, get another woman to do it. So that's very easy for that. And she identifies, if the husband finds a woman who is too young, 17 or 18 years old, her head will be full of romantic love. But then by the age of 25, when she's got enough and more children, she'll turn out to be wiser. And here Emecheta says Wango's husband is almost a stud. Stud, is sexually attractive and skillful also. So that's how most of the women of the village feel. Now, that doesn't mean that sex is not part of their life. It is part of their life, but not the life. Now, when whenever Western feminists talk about sex, it makes her laugh, she says. But then African feminism is free from the shackles of two things. One is the Western romantic illusions, and she says it is more pragmatic. Okay, now she believes that they are for many things, not just to cultivate and make themselves pretty for women. When I say they, it means about African women. So it's not just to make themselves very pretty and presentable for men. Rather, they have something called the beauty lies in sisterhood. They have something called the sisterhood. And what is this? When a woman reaches the age of about 40, sisterhood is cultivated either through marriage or through the village age group. As I told you earlier, they would have village age group mates. So they would have, and through that they start reaping lots of rewards. So in England, she recollects how she belonged to the war babies. That's how they call war babies. So she says war babies, they would call her, sometimes they would call them saltless babies. Why saltless? Because they were born at a time in Nigeria when they didn't have salt. So in the village, all these girls who were born during that moment were called saltless women. So about 16 of her age mates were there in London, and they had a group. They have their own sisterhood, or they had a group of their own. So a member of their group, she recollects how when one of their members belonging to the sisterhood was sick, what happened was, and she was admitted in the hospital. And she says all the other members, the 16 of them who were there in London, they would take turns to visit her every now and then, to the extent that the patient was called the Princess of Africa. Why? Because on visiting days, nurses and doctors had to really shoo them away, all these people. They would always flock her ward or her room in the hospital, and she recollects how this particular patient was there in the hospital for 3 weeks, and Emecheta had the chance of visiting her only twice. Why? Because every time she had to travel from London, her own place where she was, it was a long way from her house, and where by the time she reached the hospital and wanted to visit her, she had to wait for 15 minutes before her turn came up. So you imagine how many people would have been there to visit her, to make her feel wanted and to make her feel comforted. Okay, but then she says it was she who just visited her twice, but all the others who were very close by made sure that she was visited almost every other day, every day regularly, every night regularly, particularly even her own 7 children. Okay, now coming on to her husband had left this patient whom we are referring to when 3 years ago. He said that he had gone that he's going to Nigeria for on a business, but then there later on they got to know that he was living with another woman, and but then when it happens to any other woman in any part of the in any other part of the globe, it would be a great shock and a blow. But for this Nigerian woman or an African woman, it was not so. You know why? Because she just didn't care about it at all. In fact, she was too busy to care about all these things. So instantly, she becomes resilient. And I'm reminded of Michelle Obama's graduation speech on resilience, where she instantly turns to be resilient, and she trains herself to be a hairdresser. But then gradually, particularly when her children, so she knows to manage. They are great multitaskers, you see. So she was a hairdresser when her children were in school, but at the moment when she feels that her children had left and grown up, she decides to convert her large house into flats. Especially her older daughter and herself plan to start a bed and breakfast business, and soon, once it's all done, she would join the group also, and where she would be encouraged to take interest-free loan from their funds. See how supportive the sisterhood is. Okay, now if at all the husband comes back, it's good for him. Okay, even if he realizes, if he was there, fine, business would go on well, then she would have a support. But if it was not there also, it was not. So she was not looking after a man just for sexual rewards for a lot of time. But then she goes on to say, see, with regard to, she goes on to say, if it were Western women, what would they do? They would immediately hurry to get married again, particularly after a divorce or a bereavement. But African women are very slower, especially those who have children. They don't even bother to have a new life, because they have with them other women and friends, a strong networking of sisterhood. Okay, we understand all women are normally quarrelsome and jealous, but they make it up. So she says, even if they are together, they have some quarrel, they make it up. So there is a kind of a reconciliation. So she tells us about the values of reconciliation. How do they make it up? They make it up over a few brandies or chicken legs, and they understand that forgiving is the greatest virtue that one can nurture and pursue and follow. So she reiterates the point that instead of being jealous, instead of being envious, they just try to overcome it, and they want to reap the benefits of it to its utmost. Okay, so in her book Joys of Motherhood, she talks about a family woman who goes on a strike and refuses to keep housekeeping money, as the husband he drinks the greater part of the income. Okay, and she, in the same book, she describes another woman's life who is busy being a mother, good mother, and a wife. Didn't have her own women friends also, but alongside she died by the wayside, hungry and alone. So in fact, she was jealous when her husband brought a new wife. So see, that's what I want to stress upon. When there's polygamy, certain women, they utilize it or they capitalize upon it for their own welfare. But on the other hand, certain women die because of jealousy, or they are not able to, they get depressed and they're not able to overcome out of the depression that they are into. So in fact, she was jealous when her husband brought a new wife. She stayed awake, listening to all the noises that they made. But later on, she became little sensible. She did not want to quarrel with her, but soon they became friends, so that so that they are busy with, they can share their household work, and they become busy and with other work or which really interests them, and that way sexuality was pushed to the background. So here Emecheta says polygamy can be liberating rather than inhibiting her, if particularly if you are educated. Now husbands are there when they get married. They cannot stop women from attending international conferences. They cannot stop them from going back to universities. They cannot stop them or hold them back from updating their career or even getting another degree. So she finds the benefits of polygamy. What are they? So she says polygamy encourages her to value herself as a person and look outside of her family and friends. So once she gets to know that her husband is not looking at her, she doesn't go behind him. Rather, she looks outside of her family for friends whom she can rely upon. She gives her freedom, and she doesn't worry much about her husband, who doesn't even bother about her now. Whenever he comes to her, he has to be sure that he is in a good mood and washed, clean, and ready for the wife, as she sophisticated herself. But then, see, whenever husbands come to women, the husbands are sure that she's in good mood, make sure that she's in good mood, that she's ready to be a wife, play his sexual partner's role perfectly well. But then not all, and that women also have to be equally sophisticated. But then now these days, those women who take up career, they also know, they are also sophisticated, so they don't have time for dirty, moody husbands. Rather, they are comfortable only when they want to have sex. So she recollects how a small son in one of her group members in London told his teacher about two mummies, okay, not the Egyptian ones, about his own mothers, okay. So he said mummy number 1 and mummy number 2. Then the teacher was really inquisitive, and she wanted to know what it exactly meant. Then we get to know that the father had two wives, and the child enjoyed being loved and looked after by two women, his mother and the senior wife of his father. So the writer identifies that that's a good way to start one's life. In Ibuza, once a woman starts making money, she stops having children regularly. So once she turns her attention towards making money, towards choosing a career, she stops focusing on her children. Okay. Now then, because women understand that they are lucky enough to find a job, because they derive some kind of enjoyment out of job, just like they derive enjoyment out of sex. So many female writers and English female writers claim that they find their work sexually satisfactory and sometimes masturbatory also. I suppose you understand the meaning. If not, Google and see. Okay. So likewise, Emecheta also says that she finds her work very satisfying, and she reiterates the fact that African women are not against sex, that sex is part of their life, but it is not the life of the African women. Then she goes on to say, in Africa, only one's enemies will pray. That, see, still she quotes the prevalent culture there. Only if somebody is very, very hostile towards someone, or has some grudges against someone, is a woman's enemy, only then he or she would pray that the woman should have a girl child, because most of the people in Africa wanted only a man child. Okay. Then the prayers will always go, the blessings will go this way: you will safely be delivered of a bouncing baby boy, and so on. Now the pregnant woman will not say, oh no, I want a baby girl. She will not protest against it. In her heart, she also would want a man child, because so that he is not married away, he stays with the family, takes care of the mother when she becomes weak and old. Now in most of the African societies, it's understood that the birth of a son enhances two things: one, a woman's authority in the family, and another thing, the role of the child in the family, because the male child is very, very important in a family. Yet when there's a girl child, okay, though not desired, but then at an early age, from childhood, she's been programmed or conditioned to think that she has to do all the housework. So girls, the roles are ascribed to them. The social roles are ascribed to the girls, conditioned into thinking that they must do all the housework, help the mother cook, clean, fetch water, and look after the younger siblings, and so on. Now, if she says, "What is this? Why should I be doing? Why is my brother not doing?" she would be sharply reminded by her mother, "Hey, you're a girl and you're going to be a woman soon. So please mind your work." Okay. So now Emecheta goes on to discuss certain issues concerning black women. So she's saying the work. She says that the major work that they all have is to bring the next generation to the world, nurture them till they are grown up, till they fly into the nest and begin their new life. Then she's saying, yeah, taking care of the children, looking at the family is sometimes boring. Some places they even think that it's a thankless job. But she asks, is it a mean job? And then she remembers how a photojournalist once took her photo, a picture, clicked her picture in her office, and the photojournalist was too angry. You know why? Because she had her office in the kitchen, like me now in some room, okay, in her kitchen, okay. And behind her there was a package of cereal that showed or reminded her of her duties as a household woman. And then she says, what? And the writer was too angry. She said, on the one side of the kitchen she had put her typewriter also. So the photojournalist was too angry that how could, what are you communicated to the feminist writers out there in the world? But then she says, why should I be doing something wrong here? I'm not doing anything wrong or against the feminist writers. She says, in kitchen, there is more peace of the world than the nuclear scientists can ever think of, than in their labs. Then she's in. It is in the kitchens that we raise, as we teachers says, as we teachers say. It's the classrooms that we raise many leaders. So she says, it's in the kitchens that we raise many leaders, Ankumas, Jesuses. And she says, yeah, we cook them, send them away from home to be grown up men and women, and they learn love and hate. What greater job is there? Then she goes on to insist that a mother in a family is an economist, and so she lists out the unpaid job of the mothers. A mother with a family is an economist, a nurse, a painter, a diplomat, and many more roles that she has to take. So women do all of that. We form, and she says, we are told we are capable of forming over half of the population, yet where are women? Women are on the lowest rung of the ladder. And she says, mind you, women, it's not the men who push us down to the lowest rung of the ladders, but it is us. Okay? Why? Because as women, we always say, I don't know anything. I'm only a housewife. And this is a very, very common statement in India, I know, particularly in Tamil Nadu. Okay? So here, she says, women should have more choices. There should be more choices allowed, like Geraldine Ferraro. And we mean more type of Golda Meirs, Indira Gandhis, Margaret Thatcher. So Golda Meir, we know, is an Israeli Prime Minister, the fourth Israeli Prime Minister. Then Indira Gandhi also, we know, Margaret Thatcher. All of these are great politicians, women leaders of the major women leaders of noted nations. Then she's saying, but then on the contrary, there might be some women who would like to control their family and influence their family by giving birth to a future generation, by nurturing the young. But then she says, don't look down upon them, because it's not a degrading job. She says, if I had my way and if I had to take the highest paid job in the world, I should be taking up this job of training both men and women on housework. Then she says how a few privileged African women are now breaking bonds. They're living at home and they're working outside. Then she says, yeah, we are lucky, African women are lucky that way, because we have come out of our families. Why have we come out of our families, or how have we come out of our families? We've come out because these days girls are allowed to be educated, so we are out, and we stay there long enough to acquire knowledge. We equip them, and we live away from their families, and we also work shoulder to shoulder with men. And then she goes on to say that in that way black women are succeeding in various fields along with these notions. So now, how are the African women of the present days? It's not working simultaneously with men, or taking up different roles, or multitasking, or indulging in hard work. There's nothing new to the African women. That's the kind of the work that these African women have been up to all these years. So she says, in an agrarian setting, women do petty trading. They have small children with them on one hand, and they trade. Some of them even go to the extent of trading with few loaves of bread to a few packages of matches. Only lucky ladies will have a stall or shed put up. Others are not so fortunate enough to have a stall, and that stall also put up just in front of their houses. Now, she says many Nigerian women these days are living in the cities. Still, they cling on to that network of their sisterhood and the SSU and their profits, and they really, really bank on it. And they think that that's big enough for them to grow up in life. Similarly, Emecheta also has a great number of friends or knows a great number of friends who built up their families this way because of the network that they had with their sisterhood, their age group mates, or because of or because of their banking on the SSU profits. So she says all of them have turned out to be great traders, except for those people who took up the lower middle class jobs like teaching. Okay, so even those teachers had to, because it was not a very remunerative job. Okay, not a very remunerative job, so they had to give up that and go take up trading. Now, African women and success. What do we know? It's nothing new to African women. They've always been successful. So here she recollects about this Abba riot. What is this riot? Oh, I'm sorry, Abba riot. What is this Abba riot about? This Abba riot was something that was spread from Owerri in eastern Nigeria to Calabar. And this was a riot organized and popularized by women, particularly the African women who did not speak the same language. One point to be amazed at. Another, all of them were belonged to all the towns in the area to Onitsha by the river Niger, and went further across to include women from Asaba areas also. So they garnered as much as support as possible. Now, whenever the white male have to talk about this Abba riot, they would call it a real war. And it's noted that only marvelous women organize these real war. And one thing that Emecheta wants us to remember is those days were the days when they did not have telephones, WhatsApp, emails, Twitter, Insta, whatever it is. They just had their bush tracks and dangerous rivers. And if you have to just match up that distance with some other distance that you are very familiar with, it's the distance from London to Edinburgh, she says. And it was an organized war with women, just women of different groups. You know what weapons they had? They did not have nuclear weapons, nor they have atomic bombs. What did they have? They just had household utensils as weapons. And this war took place in 1929 as an answer to the British demands that women should pay taxes. So they were dead against it, and almost all the men folk praised these black women. And wherever these women or whoever talked about this Abba riot, they did not condemn these women or rebuke them, rather they admired them. So they received hordes of admiration with regard to this Abba riot. And you know, the Britishers couldn't tackle these women, so the best way that they found to tackle these women was to jail all the men whose wives were taking up active roles in the war. Okay, so they considered them to be barbaric women, but then these barbaric women whom they are looked down upon, whom they are always condescended, organize themselves to achieve such a great feat, to realize their dreams. Okay, so now Normally we know that working and achieving to greater heights is nothing new to the women of Africa, but still there are many obstacles on their way. First thing is their own community. The community does not want women to be educated. The family always prefers to educate the boy. So even while they are being educated, the women's they are told about the women's duties. So they have to strike a balance between women's duties, their education, and their career. However, they understand, women also are magnanimous enough to understand that boys, however clever they are, they will not be where they are today if they are not educated. So, or not just not educated, if they are not educated, and if they are not educated based mainly upon the sacrifices made by his own mother, by his own sweetheart, by his own wife or sister. So women realize it, African men realize it fully well, that if at all they are in a position, it's because of the women. So behind every successful African man there is a woman, there are women. Okay, so we know that African women have always been a woman who achieves, and that does not mean that she can achieve only by becoming a lawyer, a writer, or a doctor. But then we have Buchi Emecheta also agrees that there are quite a few African women who have taken up these professions, but just a handful of them and not many, she says. Then she says, for the majority of the women, African women, real achievement, as the author says, is to make her immediate environment as happy as is possible under the circumstances. So she strives hard to do that, and we have seen that in the history, in the and in the Harlem Renaissance also. How does she do her? How does she make the people in her immediate environment happy? By tending crops, or giving comfort, or cooking meal for them, taking care of their family and all that. So never at the compromise of the family. So she still will have, though she takes care of her family, that doesn't mean that she doesn't have dreams of her own. She still will have her own aspirations, higher aspirations, but then she can achieve all of them if the artificial barriers are removed in a structured way. And how can that be possible when education is free and available to every child, not just to a male child, to male as well as female? So first point. Next point, so she has certain suggestions to the community, to the society at large, to the global society probably. So women can become successful, more successful, if structured efforts are taken to remove or to keep the artificial barriers away. And first point is, when education is made free and available to all male and female child similarly. And then when male dominated media doesn't give exposure to a black woman, she's beautiful, she's a beautiful entertaining, undermining our brain power. So she says black dominated media, male dominated media, not black, male dominated media needs to look at or identify the real brain power in the black women. And black women also should know that they have the confidence that they should realize their contribution to the world. Not just realize their contribution to the world, but realize or have the confidence to accept that they are also making a valuable contribution to this particular world. So now she ends up saying, it is about time. What should we do? Let's start singing about our own heroic deeds. So Buchi Emecheta gives a clarion call to all the black women, saying that each of us women, either being as professionals or being homemakers, have done a lot to the society, have contributed a lot to the society. So let us first realize our contribution to the world. Let us also muster all courage, then also have the confidence to value the contribution that we as women has made to this world. So let us sing about our own heroic deeds in whatever way we have been doing it. Okay, so this is her clarion call to all the blacks, and with that it ends. So thank you so much. Hope you had a clarity on what it is. Meet you again in the next video. Thank you. Bye bye.